The sunlight was shining through the windows of the hospital room, touching everything with its light and warmth. Everything inside the hospital room was gloomy. Old walls with deep cracks, shabby furniture, old linens, and a depressing silence. Stacey stared at one point at the ceiling, and her body ached from being in the same position for so long. The woman was gravely ill and almost didn't get out of bed as she had no strength at all. Her emotional state was terrible. Total isolation from the world, from people, and a feeling of loneliness and longing that overwhelmed her. She didn't want to live anymore. She just had no reason to live. After all, the doctors made it clear that her situation was really serious. She thought it would be better for her to die as soon as possible. Stacey lost track of time. She no longer realized how many hours, days, and weeks had passed. All she could do was to think about her past. But those memories made her feel even worse. Stacey grew up in a small town. Her mom worked on a farm, and her dad was a tractor driver. Their life was very tough because they were always short of money. It was because her parents didn't want to work for the local farmer, Andrew. This man intimidated the whole town. He treated his workers terribly, paid them miserable salaries, and forced them to work 14 hours a day. He could not pay them at all if he didn't like someone. Stacey's parents couldn't stand such a terrible attitude and quit their jobs. They had to survive on their own because there was no other job in their small town. They started their own household and worked with no rest. Andrew was so mad at Stacey's parents that he was always trying to ruin their little business. He deliberately persuaded buyers not to buy meat, milk, and eggs from the Stacey family. He even gave them a good discount, just so that the buyers would not buy anything from the family he hated. Therefore, they rarely made a profit. Stacey did well in school and was a wonderful child. She always helped her parents because she saw how hard they worked. They always got up before the sun came up and worked until late at night. Despite such a hard life, Stacey's mom loved her dearly. When Stacey was 12, a local boy named Vincent fell in love with her. At first, it was a mix of childhood friendship and affection. The boy would carry her backpack and walk Stacey home. They often swam together in the river, burned a fire, and toasted marshmallows. Surprisingly, the childish friendship later turned into real love. Vincent would give Stacey wildflowers, sing love songs to her, and take the girl for rides on his bicycle. Stacey's parents were overjoyed because Vincent was from a wealthy family, which meant that after the wedding life would not be as difficult for their daughter as it was for them. However, Vincent's parents were clearly not happy about their son's choice. They didn't like this girl from a poor family. So they constantly persuaded Vincent to focus his attention on Ariana, the daughter of that very former Andrew. The girls even looked completely different. Stacey looked like a teenager, but Ariana was a tall, slender, and self-confident girl. Soon it was time for Vincent to leave for the army. On their last date, he whispered to Stacey, "Why don't we go to our favorite place? We won't see each other anytime soon." Vincent and Stacey had their special place, a small tent made of branches in the woods. They loved to snuggle there, dream about the future, and kiss. But today everything was different. The boy kissed his beloved and whispered to her, "Honey, don't refuse me at least today. What do we have to wait for? We love each other, and we will definitely get married when I come back from the army. Let's finally do it. Don't be afraid." The girl obeyed her lover's desire, and they spent the night together and only returned home in the morning. Vincent went to the army, and Stacey waited for him faithfully, missed him, often sent him letters, and called him. In the last 6 months, he answered her less and less often, and if he did, he answered her reluctantly and very briefly. The girl began to worry. She felt that something had changed. Everything became clear when Vincent came back from the army and told Stacey that he was breaking up with her and marrying Andrew's daughter, Ariana. This betrayal hurt the girl. She stayed in her room crying for days. Stacey's father saw her condition and was indignant. Only her mother understood Stacey and tried to comfort her. One day, her mom said, "Stacey, sweetheart, you need to calm down and get back to normal. You haven't eaten anything at all, and you haven't left the house in days. Yes, Vincent turned out to be a scumbag, but your life is not over. You know, I think you need to leave this town and go to the big city. You'll enter university, get a job, and things will get better." Stacey agreed and went to the city. She enrolled in the University of Economics, got a dorm room, and began to study diligently. 3 university years passed quickly, and here it is, the long-awaited diploma. After graduation, Stacey got a job in a very suspicious furniture manufacturing company. She was alarmed by the fact that people were constantly quitting the company, but they promised Stacey a decent salary, so the girl decided to give it a try. The company CEO was an elderly woman, Nancy. During the interview, she promised Stacey career growth, a decent salary, and the best working conditions. Stacey was hired as an accountant. The girl began to examine documents and reports and was horrified. Most of the company's profits were not from successful transactions, but from the deception of employees. The company's management invited the new employee to become a trainee, but they didn't officially hire them, explaining that any employee has to pass a probationary period. But when the time expired, the employee was informed that they did not meet some criteria. That is, people worked hard but did not get a penny for it. They could not even go to the police or the court, because officially, they never worked for this company. There were numerous violations like this. The second thing that shocked Stacey was the huge amount of defective goods. According to the papers, they were buying the best and most expensive materials. But in reality, the CEO was buying the cheapest low-quality material, and she was simply stealing the rest of the money. After working here for a month, Stacey decided to quit. She filled out a letter of resignation and handed it to Nancy. The woman was genuinely surprised and tried to find out the reason for this decision. Stacey couldn't stand it and told her everything she thought about this whole situation. "If you keep working like this, you'll go bankrupt soon. I'm not going to sign fraudulent papers, and I don't want to be involved in any criminal activity. After all, you can work fairly and make a good profit without breaking the law. You need to respect your employees and pay them on time. Then people will stop quitting your company. Start buying high-quality materials and making high-quality furniture, and then sales will increase. I think everything can be fixed in just 6 months. But so far, the third business partner has broken a contract with you." At first, Nancy was mad. "Are you out of your mind? What makes you think you have the right to tell me what to do? I've been the head of this company for 5 years now, and I'm doing a great job. Although, there's some truth in what you're saying. Things have been really bad lately. Well, let's try to fix the situation together, and if it works, I'll appoint you as the chief economist." "Deal," Stacey agreed. "But on one condition." "Deal. But please, I don't want to be paid like the rest of the staff. I do a lot of work, and my salary should be much higher." Nancy agreed, but immediately hated Stacey, even though she realized that the girl was right. The CEO overcame her greed and followed Stacey's advice, and after a while, the things in the company really improved, and the income increased substantially. Nancy was delighted and promoted Stacey to a new position, as promised. After all, the benefits of her work were obvious. The girl saved money for a whole year and finally managed to open her own business, a small cleaning company. The staff consisted of 6 employees. Stacey interviewed all of them because the reputation of her company depended on the quality of cleaning, politeness, and honesty of the staff. She didn't try to skimp on equipment and cleaning products. She decided to buy only the most expensive and effective products. Soon the business became really successful. Stacey invested all of her income into the business, and now her employees were already working at different events, and the payments there were much higher. It was hard to believe, but 4 years later, Stacey had surpassed Nancy in terms of income. Nancy was very angry and wanted to take revenge on this insolent girl. However, no one realized how hard Stacey worked to achieve it. Yes, she managed to buy an apartment and a car, but there was no time left for a personal life. It was very important for Stacey to provide a decent life for herself because she couldn't forget the poverty she'd grown up in. So, Stacey wanted her future family to never lack anything. She was even late for the funeral of her father, who died so suddenly of cardiac arrest. It was just that she had a very busy day at the office that day. Stacey had known Nancy's son Scott for a long time. Sometimes he showed up at Nancy's company, but he preferred to travel the world. So officially he was employed as Nancy's consultant, and he was getting a good salary. But in reality, he didn't work there even for a day. Of course, the guy heard rumors about a talented and rich employee who runs her own business in addition to her main job. The guy took a closer look at her. She wasn't beautiful, too skinny, with a sharp nose, and looked like some kind of bard. But in general, not the worst option. But with a wife like that, he'll have a beautiful life for sure. And he won't have to work. She will do everything herself. Scott began to actively court Stacey, gave her expensive gifts and flowers, told her that he loved her, that he wanted to start a family. Stacey was tired of loneliness. She wanted love and care, so she instantly fell in love. 3 months later they got married. Of course, Stacey paid for the wedding. They began to live in Stacey's apartment. For the first year, everything was perfect. Scott was happy with everything. He understood that the main thing is to say beautiful words and be gentle. Stacey was ready to do anything for this. However, her mother-in-law still hated the girl and soon began to turn Scott against Stacey. When are you going to have kids? Look at her. She's skinny, with dark circles under her eyes. Why do you even want such an ugly woman? After such conversations, Scott began to reproach his wife more and more often, asking why they still had no children. Stacey suffered a lot because of this and underwent a comprehensive examination. The results were disappointing. She had almost no chance to get pregnant, but doctors strongly recommended Scott to undergo the examination too. After all, men can have problems too. Stacey decided to have a serious talk with her husband. Scott, listen, I've been to the hospital. Yes, I do have health problems, but that doesn't mean I'm infertile. I still have a chance, but you should get a checkup too, just to make sure everything is okay. The man got furious. I don't have any problems. Do you understand? You're the one who's not healthy. So get treatment. And leave me alone. I'm not going anywhere. Let's just finish this unpleasant conversation. It hurt Stacey very much. Her husband didn't even try to encourage her. She cried for a long time. The family began to quarrel more and more often. But 6 months later, a miracle happened and Stacey got pregnant. She was so happy. It had been such a difficult way. Painful procedures, injections. But the main thing was the positive result. Scott was also excited, but he was in no hurry to help his wife in any way. Stacey still worked without days off and slept only 4 hours a day. But Scott didn't work at all and had fun with his friends more and more often. That day he was driving home. Today he was having fun not only with his friends, but also with prostitutes. The man lost control of his car and got into an accident. He survived and suffered only a few fractures. But Stacey was so scared and nervous that she had a miscarriage. This grief killed her mentally. She fell into a deep depression. Nothing could make her happy anymore. But Scott didn't care. They became strangers to each other. Eventually, Stacey's body couldn't take it either, and she ended up in the hospital. After examination, the doctors shocked her. There was a suspicion of cancer. The situation was getting worse. She suffered from constant bleeding, some strange rash, fainting, and nausea, and there was a lump in her throat, which prevented her from swallowing and breathing normally. She had almost stopped getting out of bed. Stacey dreamed of only one thing: to die as soon as possible and not to suffer anymore. But Nancy was happy about this situation, because very soon they would get rid of this annoying girl, and Scott would inherit her company. They only need to make a will. Scott was not sad either, because he never really loved Stacey. So, he supported his mother's idea and began to visit his wife in the hospital more and more often. "Hello, my love. How are you doing? Look what I brought you. There's an orthopedic pillow, your favorite juice, and delicious pastries." The woman was always happy to see her beloved husband. She always smiled sincerely and forgot about her pain for at least a little while. But this time she was shocked by his words. "Stacey, listen. I need to tell you something. Just don't get me wrong. I really hope that you will recover. But still, just in case, I made a will on your behalf. Will you sign it? If anything happens, I will run your company instead of you." But Stacey only grinned. She could sense the falseness in his voice, but she felt so bad that she signed the will. Why would she care what happens to her company if she was going to die anyway? A satisfied Scott immediately said goodbye to Stacey and called Nancy. "Mom, I did it. Stacey signed the will. Now, after her death, I'll be the head of her company." "Great job, my dear. So, you have your own business now. And don't worry about a new wife. We'll find the most beautiful girl for you." That was the last time Scott visited Stacey at the hospital. He never visited her again. The treatment was not helping Stacey at all. On the contrary, it was getting worse. And she suddenly thought, "What am I doing here? I should visit my mom before I die and say goodbye to her. I visited her so rarely. I was only thinking about business and my own happiness. I must spend the last days of my life with her. Yes, I'll go home. It won't be any worse than it is here. It turns out that nobody needs me here." The woman didn't inform anyone. She got dressed and quietly left the hospital and headed to her hometown. Stacey's mom almost fainted when she saw her daughter on the doorstep in such a terrible condition. She cried, "Stacey, my dear, what happened to you? Are you sick? You're so skinny, and you're shivering. Come in and lie down on the sofa. I'll bring you a blanket now." Stacey cried quietly, kissed her mom's hands, and said, "Mommy, I am so sorry. I didn't visit you much. All I thought about was my career and a husband who turned out to be a traitor. Mom, I feel so bad. I lost my baby, and now I'm dying. I decided to come and say goodbye and die in my hometown. Only now do I realize that you're the only one who ever loved me. I'm sorry for everything. I love you, Mom." Stacey turned away and cried loudly. Susan did not ask any questions, but stroked Stacey's shoulders and whispered, "I love you too, sweetie. I'll make you some soothing tea now. And don't say such horrible words to me again. You will recover and live a long and happy life. I will not survive without you." 4 days passed. Stacey was lying in bed all the time and was not even crying anymore. Susan was very worried about her daughter, tried to talk to her, and asked her to eat something, but did not get any reaction from Stacey. Then the elderly woman came up with a trick. The next morning, she didn't get out of bed and called out to Stacey, "Honey, my back hurts a lot. I can't get up. I have a lot of things to do. Will you help me? I have to feed the livestock and go to the woods to get berries. I didn't tell you, but I'm selling blueberries. Please, I really need your help. I need to get some rest today, and tomorrow I'll be all right." Stacey immediately got out of bed, went to her mom, gave her a pill, and quietly asked, "Tell me what to do." Stacey quickly finished all the household chores, put on her rubber boots and a jacket with a hood, took a basket, and went into the woods. She had known all the routes there since childhood, so she went there without any fear. Besides, even if something happened, she didn't care. Stacey worked and didn't look around at all, completely immersed in her thoughts about death. The woman didn't even notice that she walked into the deepest part of the woods, where there was a huge swamp. None of the locals risked coming here, for they all knew that it was possible to drown there. Instead of blueberries, Stacey noticed cranberries and began to pick berries. She wanted to please her mother. Stacey moved away from the swamp and started to pick up berries. The cranberries were quite large, and the basket began to fill up very quickly. Suddenly, Stacey took a step to the side and fell into the swamp. She tried to get out, grabbing some branches, but they also fell into the swamp. That's when she got really scared. No one knows where she is, and soon the swamp will completely suck her in. Just a few minutes ago she had been thinking about death and wanted to die, but now she felt insanely eager to live. The woman began to shout loudly, "Help me! Somebody help me!" The swamp was dragging her deeper and deeper, and she couldn't believe she was going to die in such a ridiculous way. Suddenly, Stacey heard a rustle, and then she saw a huge wolf who was looking at her intently, baring his fangs. Stacey screamed and closed her eyes, thinking, "That's it. Now the wolf is going to eat me." But the wolf did not attack her. On the contrary, it howled and ran away. In a few minutes, the wolf came back together with a forester. It was a tall, gray-haired man with a beard. Stacey began to beg, "Help me, please." The old man frowned and commanded, "Don't scream and do what I say. Otherwise you'll really drown." "How did you even get here, traveler?" The man took a huge knife out of his backpack, climbed up a small tree, and began to trim the top of it. The huge branch fell almost on Stacey's head. The forester reached down to the ground, grabbed one end of the branch, and began to shout, "Hold on to the branch and try to pull your knees up. Don't panic. I won't leave you. It's going to work." Without wasting a second, Stacey grasped the branch and managed to pull her exhausted body to the surface. Her boots and socks stayed in the swamp forever, but it didn't matter. The exhausted woman only managed to whisper, "Thank you," and lost consciousness, her weakened body unable to withstand such stress. The man took Stacey in his arms and carried her to a local elderly lady who lived on the edge of the woods. Everyone was afraid of her and thought she was a witch, but still, they often asked her for help. She could cure many diseases. Only the forester was not afraid of her. He knew that Mrs. Parsons was not a witch, but a talented surgeon in the past. But one day an irreparable tragedy happened in her life that had taken away her entire family. After this tragedy, Mrs. Parsons ran away from people and settled in the woods. She thought it was a temporary solution, but eventually, she decided to stay here forever. Mrs. Parsons read a lot, learned about herbs, and made medicines from them. One day she helped the forester, and that's how they met. Their destinies were very similar. Stephen was an investigator in the past and loved his job. He had a beloved wife, Zoe, but they couldn't have children. They wanted to adopt a child from an orphanage and even prepared all the necessary papers, but their dream was not destined to come true. Suddenly Zoe got very sick. At first, they thought it was just a cold. The doctors didn't detect a serious illness, prescribed medication, and let her go home. At night, Zoe's condition got worse. A strange rash appeared on her body. She had a fever, and by morning she had passed away. An autopsy revealed that it wasn't a cold. This ridiculous death shocked Stephen. He could not tolerate the sympathetic looks of his colleagues, and when he was at home alone, he wanted to scream from longing. Soon Stephen quit his job, sold his apartment, and moved to this small town, where he began to work as a forester. He felt more peaceful in the woods, and his emotional wound gradually healed. One day he rescued a little wolf cub that had fallen into a trap. Then he took this poor animal to Mrs. Parsons. The forester named this wolf cub Ralph. The wolf grew up and remained devoted to his rescuer. Ralph lived in Stephen's backyard and always went to the woods with him. Stephen reached Mrs. Parsons' house and knocked on the door. The frightened woman immediately opened the door. The man showed her Stacey and said, "I found her in the woods. She almost drowned in the swamp." She needs help. Can you help her? Take her to the bathroom and wash all the mud off her while I make a potion. The elderly man washed Stacey, wiped her with a towel, wrapped her in a clean sheet, and took her to the guest room. Mrs. Parsons had already prepared everything and said, "Well done. Now go home while I try to help her. I can't promise anything, but I'll try to save her. Come back tomorrow." The forester said goodbye to Mrs. Parsons, but he didn't go home. Stephen decided to go to the police station and find out who this stranger was, for he had never seen her before. The policeman listened to Stephen's story and said, "You said she had black hair, a sharp nose, a slim body, and she obviously came from another city. If she is not local, why would she even go to the woods alone? No, there's something else going on here." At this point, a frightened Susan entered the police station. She was crying and talking fast. "I need help. My daughter, Stacey, came to visit me a week ago. She's in depression, and she's seriously ill. Anyway, she didn't want to live. She didn't even want to get out of bed. I just wanted to help her, so I asked her to go to the woods to get berries. I thought it would distract her, but she still hasn't come back. What the hell have I done? Where am I supposed to look for her now? What if something happened to her out there? I'll never forgive myself. Help me, please." And then the forester realized everything and said, "I think I know where your daughter is. Don't worry, she's alive. I saved her from the swamp, but she's unconscious now. I took her to Mrs. Parsons." Susan turned pale. "To Mrs. Parsons? Did you take her to that witch? You should have called a doctor. What if she makes it even worse?" The policeman calmed the woman down. "Susan, don't say that. She may be a witch, but she really helps people. Go to Mrs. Parsons tomorrow and take your daughter home. And you should be grateful to Stephen. He saved Stacey's life." Susan shifted her gaze to the forester and rushed to hug him. "Thank you, Stephen. I don't understand why Stacey has so much trouble. Her husband left her. She lost her baby. She got seriously ill. And today she almost drowned in the swamp. Maybe someone cursed her." Stacey began to come to her senses only the next evening. Her head ached, and she couldn't understand where she was. Then she remembered everything that had happened to her in the woods. She was wearing a long cotton shirt, and there were some herbs in the room. The woman tried to get up, but she couldn't because she felt very dizzy. An elderly woman entered the house. She walked up to Stacey, put her hand on her forehead and said, "Great, your temperature is normal. I didn't think I could help you. So, I think it's time for us to talk. Why did you go to the swamp alone? Did you want to die? My name is Mrs. Parsons. Locals are afraid of me and think I'm a witch. But that doesn't matter, because I help people faithfully." Stacey replied quietly, "My name is Stacey. Thank you for saving me. How did you know I didn't want to live? It's true. I wanted to die. I have a terrible disease. I spent a month in the hospital, but my condition only worsened. So I came back home to my mom." Stacey told Mrs. Parsons her diagnosis. But Mrs. Parsons frowned. "I don't think so. I'm sure you don't have any serious problems. The doctors have misdiagnosed you. Most likely you have thyroid and hormone problems. Are you suffering from bleeding and faintness?" Stacey was surprised. "Yes, that's right. How did you know?" "I didn't tell you anything." Mrs. Parsons smiled. "I used to be a doctor. So, I'll try to cure you. But you have to take all the medicine I will give you. You either trust me or it will all be in vain. Also, I think you've been worrying too much. That's why your body can't cope. The first thing you have to do is put away all your thoughts of death. You have to believe that you will definitely get better." Stacey promised. "Now I really want to live. Just save me. I beg you. I'll do anything you say." At that moment, the door opened, and Stephen and Susan entered the house. The woman rushed to her daughter, hugged her, kissed her and whispered, "You're alive. I almost lost my mind when I realized you didn't come home. Don't you dare die. Do you hear me? I need you." Stacey was crying too and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I've disappointed you again. I didn't get any berries, and I almost died. But Mrs. Parsons says the doctors were wrong, and I won't die. I believe her, and so should you. I'll stay here while she treats me. So go home and wait for me." Then Stacey looked at the forester and said quietly, "Thank you for saving my life. You are a real hero. And you have such a loyal dog. At first, I thought it was a wolf. I was so scared." Stephen smiled and looked a little embarrassed. "I just helped you. Any human would have done the same. By the way, you weren't wrong about the wolf. I found him when he was just a cub. His name is Ralph. I'm going to work your mom home now, and I'll visit you later. Okay." Stacey felt embarrassed too. In the woods, she had thought Stephen was very old, but now she realized that he wasn't. She didn't understand why, but her heart raced. "I'll be very glad to see you, Stephen." 3 months passed. Stacey lived at Mrs. Parsons' house, and Stephen visited her often. They liked to work together in the woods, talk, and eat berries, and soon they became very close. They told each other about their past. The woman felt much better when Stephen was around. He taught her to embrace the trees in the woods and exchange energy with them, to listen to the sound of the wind and the singing of birds. Thanks to Mrs. Parsons' treatment, Stacey's health improved. She got better, looked better, and smiled more often. Meanwhile, Scott was already running Stacey's company. Like his mother, he began to deceive his employees and fine them for no reason. When the doctors told him that Stacey ran away from the hospital, he immediately realized that she had gone to her hometown to say goodbye to her mother. He didn't expect to see her alive again. The man had fun with other girls and lived happily. He didn't care about his wife's destiny at all. Stacey remained in the past for him. But one day Nancy came to him and told nervously, "We celebrated Stacey's death too early. It turned out that she is alive and even dating some man. What are we supposed to do now?" Scott couldn't believe it. "This can't be. How is that possible?" "How do you know?" Nancy persisted. "I got a call from my friend. Some farmers from Stacey's hometown visited her, and they told her everything. They say some local witch cured her. So now your dear wife is doing just fine." Scott got furious. "I don't believe it. We have to go there. I have to find everything out myself. I'm going to force her to come back to me." The next day, Stacey came to her mom's house together with Stephen. Susan cooked a delicious dinner and invited Stacey and Stephen into the house. Suddenly a fancy car pulled up in front of the house. Scott and Nancy got out of the car. The man saw his wife. She looked so happy, and a tall man with a beard was standing next to her. He was holding her hand so gently. Strangely enough, Scott felt jealous, even though he always thought he didn't love Stacey. He ran up to the couple and began his conversation. "Well, hello, my dear wife. So, that's where you ran away from your husband. I thought you were really sick, but you just ran away to cheat on me. Pack your bags, and let's go home now." Then Nancy joined the conversation. "Stacey, sweetie, what the hell are you doing? Why are you dishonoring your husband? Aren't you ashamed?" Stacey was so confused that she didn't even know what to say. She didn't want to go back. She and Scott had become strangers long ago, but the situation was saved by Stephen. "Excuse me, mister. What are you talking about? You didn't care about your wife for 3 long months, and now you suddenly decided to find her. Do you have any idea what Stacey had to go through to get back on her feet? Where have you been?" Nancy got angry. "Who the hell are you? This is our family, and we will solve our problems without your help. Stacey, stop listening to strangers. Pack your bags. We're going home." But the forester only grinned and replied, "Strangers? So you didn't recognize me? Let me remind you. Do you remember the investigator who almost put you in jail 6 years ago? I can see that you do. Well, that was me. And you know, I still have all the evidence of your crime in a safe place. I haven't lost anything. Stacey told me that you're still deceiving your employees. And since she's alive, the will is invalid. I see you're disappointed. You came here to make sure Stacey was dead, and you didn't expect to see her alive. I think Scott and Stacey can handle it themselves. But you, Nancy, this time, you will go to jail. I'm not gonna miss this opportunity. Nancy looked frightened and only told her son, Scott, let's get out of here. Please, leave Stacey alone. Let her live the way she wants. But Scott didn't want to give up. He began to persuade Stacey to come back to him. Honey, come on, please, let's go home. Don't be silly. We are family. We have a business, and we love each other. I love you so much, my dear. But Stacey no longer believed him. She smiled sadly and replied, first of all, the business is not yours. It's mine. And the apartment is also mine. I bought it before we got married, so you don't get anything after the divorce. I'm not going to live with you. We're getting a divorce. You never loved me. Don't lie to me and to yourself. You were waiting for me to die. Otherwise you'd never have forced me to sign the will. I'll be back in the city next week. So you have a week to pack up your stuff and move out of my apartment. Scott and Nancy left. And Stephen hugged Stacey and said, so that's who your mother-in-law is. Well, now I'm not surprised at anything. She's a fraud. I can only imagine how much you've suffered. And her son is no better than his mother. So, what have you decided? Are you going back to the city? To your husband? To be honest, I'm so attached to you. I can't imagine my life without you anymore. But I understand that city life is more comfortable for you. Stacey looked Stephen straight in the eye and said, Stephen, yes, I will go to the city next week, but only to sell everything. I'm not going anywhere from my hometown now. You taught me to love the woods, to love my home. I feel so happy here. When I ran my company in the city, I didn't have time for anything else, and I wasn't happy. Business in a big city is tough. So I'm going to build a house here and start a new business. I will try to start a farm, but I will do everything not like the local farmer. The quality of products will be excellent, and I will pay decent salaries to my employees. I realized I should live the way my heart asks me to live, not my mind. And I really want you to be always by my side. I can feel your soul, and you can feel mine. What do you think about this idea? Will you help me? Stephen was so excited. He hugged Stacey and whispered, I'd do anything for you. I fell in love with you the day I brought you to Mrs. Posson's. You were so helpless, so tiny and fragile. I need you, Stacey. I need you like air. You gave me a reason to live. So, shall we go inside? On Monday, Stacey went to the city. She sold her company and her apartment very profitably, loaded her belongings into the truck and into her car, and left this city for good. There were no regrets. Now this noisy city no longer seemed magical to her, it seemed dirty and messy. She wanted to go back to her hometown, where her mother and Stephen were, where her soul was calm. Stephen also traveled with her, but for a different reason. He took all the evidence on Nancy's case to the investigators he knew and asked them to open the case again. Investigators from the Economic Security Department initiated inspections and revealed a lot of violations. Now Nancy faced a jail sentence. Scott was so frightened that he immediately left for another country. He was in no hurry to rescue his mom. He didn't really care. Only now, when Nancy was in the detention center waiting for her trial, she realized what a selfish person she had raised. Nancy did everything for her little boy. He had never lacked anything. Yes, she deceived people, but she did it for Scott's sake. But what did she get in return? Now her son has abandoned her and run away. stealing almost all of her money. Stacey started a new life. Stephen and Stacey bought building materials, and the man started building a new house. Stacey wanted a spacious house with a balcony, a terrace, and a gazebo. They decided that Susan would also live with them, so they designed a spacious room for her with a large bed, a comfortable chair, and a small library. And they didn't forget about a vegetable garden. At the same time, they were building a farm, following all the rules, so that the livestock would be comfortable there. Susan was overjoyed that now she and her daughter were inseparable, and she liked Stephen very much. He was a hard-working and sincere man, and he really loved Stacey. The man seemed aloof and taciturn, but he proved his love by his actions, even in small things. Stephen silently covered his wife with a blanket if she took a nap during the day, reminded her to take her vitamins regularly, and at night, he hugged her, saying softly, "I love you more than life." It's been a year. The house and the farm were finished. All this time, Stacey worked as an accountant. They bought livestock. The business began to expand. Stacey successfully sold products to customers from the city, and even to some small restaurants, because lately, many people preferred to eat healthy food. Rabbit meat, quail eggs, and milk were the most popular products. Susan learned to make goat cheese as a professional. The family business already needed employees. Soon, locals began to quit Andrew's farm. Lately, he became even more greedy and insolent. Stacey immediately offered a decent salary and respected the employees. Many employees couldn't even believe their fortune. But Andrew began threatening Stacey that he would burn down their farm. He didn't like this kind of competition at all. He decided that he had to act quickly. But instead of setting the farm on fire himself, he hired local alcoholics to do the job. Stacey and Stephen slept that night, but Susan had insomnia. The woman heard someone breaking the fence outside, and then Ralph howled loudly. She rushed to wake up Stephen and Stacey. At first, Stephen didn't understand what was going on, but when he heard Ralph's howling, he immediately got out of bed. He grabbed his gun and ran outside. The two bastards with the gas cans didn't even make it to the farm because Ralph stopped one of them by grabbing his leg. Stephen commanded Stacey, "Run to the policeman's house." The woman ran to a local police officer, and Stephen decided to defend his property. He had invested so much effort into his business, and he wasn't going to just give up. A fight broke out. Stephen was stronger and soon defeated both scumbags, especially since they were drunk. He pointed a shotgun at them and shouted, "Who hired you? How much money did they promise you for doing such a sneaky thing? Bastards." One of them shouted, "Don't shoot, Stephen. Andrew hired us. Please forgive us." A policeman and Stacey arrived. The villains were taken away, and only then Stacey and Stephen noticed that there was a red stain on Ralph's fluffy fur. Stephen shouted, "Ralph, buddy, what happened to you? Did that jerk have a knife? I'll save you, buddy. Just don't die. I beg you. You are my most faithful friend." The man immediately took the furry friend in his arms. Stacey started the car, and they drove to Mrs. Posson's house. Mrs. Possons let the couple in without any questions. They put Ralph on the table and treated the wound. When Stacey saw the needle and thread in her hands, she felt sick. Mrs. Possons commanded, "Stephen, tie his mouth with rope. I don't have any anesthetic, so I'll have to sew while he's conscious. And hold him tight so he doesn't move. Stacey, don't just stand there. Help me." For Ralph was still trying to break free and howling in pain, tears streaming into his eyes. Then Mrs. Possons gave him some medicine, gave Stephen some ointment, and told him to bring the wolf he every other day, and most importantly, to make sure he didn't chew the threads on the wound. Ralph was recovering, started to drink water, and then to eat. Stephen was always there for him. He took the wolf to Mrs. Possons, stroked him, and whispered something to him. Susan once told Stacey, "You know, honey, A man who treats animals that way can't be a jerk. Stephen is a decent manual. I'm so glad you've finally found your happiness too. Andrew ended up in jail for attempted arson. Scott quickly wasted all his money in another country, and soon he had to come back home. But once the creditors found out, his life turned into a living hell. Stacey's ex-fiancé, the same Vincent who had broken up with her so cowardly when she was young, came to Stacey's farm one day. "Hello, Stacey. I guess you still hate me, and you have good reason to. I acted cowardly back then. I married Ariana then, but I soon regretted it. We didn't even love each other. She behaved not like a wife, but like my boss. Humiliated me, and then she filed for divorce and left. My parents died a long time ago, and I was left alone. I guess that's my punishment for what I did. Stacey, I need a job. Give me any job, I beg you. I'll do anything you say. I need money badly. My sister is seriously ill." He was sure Stacey would kick him out, but the woman only smiled and replied, "You're right, Vincent. I hated you for years. I couldn't understand why you did that to me. But now, having gone through a lot, I don't hold a grudge against you. On the contrary, if you hadn't left me then, I wouldn't have gone to the city. I wouldn't have been able to achieve anything. And most importantly, I wouldn't have met Stephen. You know, only with him I realized what it is to be really happy. And actually, we really need employees. So, come back tomorrow morning. But remember, no alcohol at your workplace." The man was so happy. He thanked Stacey and started to work the very next day. He watched Stacey and Stephen's relationship and sincerely regretted that he had lost such a woman. Another 6 months passed. Stacey felt fine, except that she began to gain a lot of weight, which was unusual for her. The woman was worried, but she was busy working on the farm and didn't have time to think about bad things. So she kept postponing her visit to the doctor. But when the belly began to enlarge, Stephen was scared and took his wife to Mrs. Possons. Mrs. Possons looked at Stacey, listened to her, and laughed out loud. "Do you really think Stacey is sick? She's pregnant. I believe she's at least 4 months pregnant." Stacey was shocked. She couldn't believe it. After all, years ago, after a miscarriage, the doctors told her she wouldn't be able to get pregnant ever again. She touched her belly and whispered, "I don't believe it. Is it really true?" Stephen, who had also dreamed of children for so many years, hugged Stacey and almost cried with happiness. "We'll go to the hospital tomorrow. That's it. You won't work on the farm anymore, and I'll do all the housework myself. You will only relax and get ready to be a mother. I can't believe I'm going to be a father." The couple came out of the doctor's office happy. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy and said they were going to have a daughter. From that day on, Stephen really was doing all the housework himself, cooking dinner and showering Stacey with love and care. She had no more regrets about her past and her unsuccessful marriage. Apparently, this was her long journey to true happiness.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hope to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.